Thank you to everybody for coming. I'm really happy to be here in Manchester because it's a nice city and I like it, but also because in many ways it was in this city that the modern economic justice movement was born. It was here, as I'm sure you all know, in England's dark satanic mills, as Blake said, that people were robbed of their humanity in the name of progress, in the name of development. People were employed in a state of being not much different from slavery, in the most unimaginable noise and filth and stench, with a brutality barely imagined by us today. Humans were wrenched from their social context into something akin to a vision of hell. And unfortunately, this isn't something that's confined to the distant past that we read about only in history books. It's a mirror image of the injustices that we see around the world today. Injustices that lie at the very heart of this form of globalization that runs our economy. However, there's something very optimistic about the history of Manchester as well, because out of this horror emerged the movement for democracy, for votes, for ordinary people, but also the trade union movement. Calling for healthcare, calling for education, calling for rights in the workplace. In other words, an economic justice movement was born here in the midst of this horror, which is critically relevant today. And I want to read out, it caused the poet Percy Shelley to write this work called The Mask of Anarchy. He was very angry when he read about the massacre at Peterloo. This huge demonstration in Manchester where the cavalry, it was a very peaceful demonstration, the cavalry went in and killed and injured hundreds of people. And in the wake of this demonstration, he wrote this amazing poem which echoes, I think, down the ages. And it starts off, "You who suffer woes untold, or to feel or to behold your lost country bought and sold with a price of blood and of gold." And I think those words could easily address the millions of people today around the world who are toiling their lives away in sweatshops and slums across the planet. In this global economy, in the name of progress and development. And these are really Orwellian terms that we've just come to accept on the news and in the newspapers every day. We have an economy which is dominated by vast monopolies which control and speculate with the basics of life, and we call this the free market. We have vast pools of poverty existing side by side with extraordinary wealth, unprecedented wealth in the history of the planet, and we call this progress. We have a situation where popular leaders are marginalised or destabilised or worse, and their economies are taken over and controlled by international institutions having strings pulled by Washington. And we call this good governance. We call this freedom. We call this choice. Today, as a result of years of debt crisis, of deregulation, of the forcing open of markets, finance is king. Finance rules the world. Finance has brought our society and our world to the brink of catastrophe. But rather than being reined in, it goes from strength to strength, and governments across the world claim they're powerless to contain it. And in fact, we're seeing the control of finance move into more and more aspects of our lives, our society and our planet, even in the wake of the financial crisis. So food is one example that the WDM, one of the co-hosts of this conference, is working on. Increasingly, food is not only owned and controlled by a few global corporations, that's been going on for a long time now, but the price of food is not based on any kind of genuine supply and demand factors. It's based on the rumours and greed of the market. Food is primarily a commodity to be gambled with in today's economy. In Africa, a new colonial project is going on where states and financial interests are competing to buy up vast tracts of land. And as climate change destroys the planet in years to come, this land across Africa and the potential for food it represents will become the basis of speculation in money markets thousands of miles away. The very air we breathe is being commodified and financialised. Carbon markets, which are seen by world leaders as the answer to our climate problems, have been created to turn carbon into a financial product. The use of airspace will be decided not on the basis of need, but on the basis of market imperatives. So here we have the basics of life, not merely privatised and turned into commodities to be bought by the user. Worse than that, financialised, traded through all sorts of complex financial products that are difficult to understand by hedge funds and banks in enormous global acts of speculation. And if people starve or the planet's ecosystem collapses, at least someone somewhere has made a profit. And if you're lucky, your pension fund might even have been invested in it. Now, the creation of the Industrial Revolution, England's Industrial Revolution, which I started with earlier, was partly driven by the enclosure of the commons. Ordinary people prevented from using land and resources which had traditionally been seen as commonwealth. And I think the era of finance represents a new enclosure of the commonwealth, taking away things we need to enjoy life and renting them back to us at vastly inflated prices. And to go on living in this kind of world, people have become entangled, and countries have become entangled in a web of debt. Indeed, as some of our Greek colleagues say, we live in a debtocracy where we're ruled by debt. Even the International Monetary Fund, even the Financial Times says our economy is eating itself. The Financial Times has got a great series, if people have read it, called Capitalism in Crisis, and it's very, very interesting. The launch article in the series says that inequality created by the rule of the 1%, of course, is the central issue facing the world today. Despite that, we have no politicians capable of challenging the vested interest that would need to be taken on to really seriously change things and come up with a different solution. So we witness the obscene sight of bankers receiving massive bonuses while the poorest in our societies are paying for their mistakes in cuts to their healthcare and their education and their welfare state. And this has happened time and time again over 30 years. This is what the Third World Debt Crisis that we were set up to fight against was all about. The history of the developing world, of the global south, is being replayed under our noses in Europe as a result of this major debt crisis created by an economy run by the 1%. So in Europe today, we have structural adjustment policies being implemented. A third of the Greek population has fallen below the poverty line. Wages have been cut by a third. Over 50% of young people in Greece are unemployed. And all so that Greece can get a bailout package which has nothing at all to do with helping the people of Greece and everything to do with repaying the bankers who created the crisis. They've even set up, to prove this, they've even set up a special account, and the money will go from the bailout, will go into this account from European governments, and it will come out of that account into the coffers of European banks. It will not touch the people of Greece. And of course, meanwhile, speculators are making a killing off this. Vulture funds are swooping down on Greece, just as they have done on Argentina, on Ecuador, on Peru, on Liberia, on Zambia, profiting from the misery of the people of Greece by betting that the country will go bankrupt. One of these vulture funds is quoted in the Financial Times a couple of years ago saying, "We thrive on people being misinformed." And all of this is perfectly legal in our economy. And finally, of course, this happens without any democracy whatsoever because the Greek government has been suspended, effectively. And indeed, the creditors have said time and time again that it would really be very nice if they were suspended for a little bit longer to make sure that this bailout package can go into effect. Now, these injustices stretch back way further than the Industrial Revolution. They stretch back to ancient times, and I've said it a couple of times to people who've been in the workshops I've been in today. But there's a great book by David Graeber called Debt, the First 5,000 Years, and it talks about how in ancient society, debt would rip apart the social fabric of ancient society, and people would have to sell their land, people would have to sell their kids, men would have to sell their wives, and eventually sell themselves to pay off their debt. And wealth and power would become amazingly concentrated in these societies. Well, look at the similarities with our own society. Debts have been used to paper over the cracks of social inequality. Land and resources have been concentrated in the hands of a very few. Parts of the world are bled of resources to fuel overconsumption elsewhere. And the really worrying thing is that this has changed people's behaviour and people's values. So human beings are capable, I think we can all see, human beings are capable of great things, great generosity. Human beings are also capable of terrible, selfish acts. The problem is we have an economy today which incentivises those terrible, selfish acts. And where selfishness and greed are incentivised, of course they're going to thrive. When people feel disempowered to change the world, when they're told the well-being of an individual is bound up with their status, in how much they earn, they will eventually act as if this was the case and spend time trying to prevent those even less fortunate getting a bit of what they have. This is the kind of world we have ended up with today, and it has been mirrored in many periods in history. So I will finish by saying, what can we do about it? Changing the values. Dina talked about values. Someone earlier talked about values in the audience. Changing values is critical. And that means we have to build a movement capable of changing people's opinions, people's minds, people's behaviour. In all periods where there's been great injustice, great oppression, there has also been great resistance. There have been those arguing for renewal. There have been positive and radical solutions proposed. So in ancient times, a Jubilee was proposed, which is where we got our name from. The idea of cancelling debts, of freeing slaves, of leaving the land to regain its fertility. All spurred on, of course, not given graciously, but spurred on by peasant and plebeian revolts in the ancient world. 150 years ago, when Manchester was a byword for the horrors of industrialisation, trade unions and movements for the vote conjured up an entirely different sort of world. And today we have the same things to look to. So it's fantastic that Dina is here representing for us the Arab Spring, not simply a political revolution, but a revolution for economic justice in that part of the world. In Latin America, where after many, many years of rule by the 1%, first very brutal military regimes in the 1970s, and many countries are still paying back their debts from that period, then by technocratic parties representing the corporate interests of the West, genuinely popular movements have arisen to challenge in that whole region that way of doing things. And I think the same spirit is growing up in the world today through Occupy, through the Indignados, through the debt audit movements that are happening in Europe. These movements have already started changing people's minds, changing people's values about what it means to live in a society, what an economy should serve, what it means to repay your debt, and why you should repay your debt. And we now have to use this potential to make the movement truly global, to create the change that none of us expected not very long ago, but we can all see now is very sorely needed. And in order to answer or not answer the question that we got at the front of where next, I mean, I would be delighted if everyone in the audience wanted to join Jubilee or WDM. We have many things that you can do and get involved in and so on, but it's also not the whole point. I mean, the point is we have to go beyond these organisations, and we see ourselves very much as a part of a much, much wider movement for creating a better economy based on a different sort of values. And I'm going to end by quoting again from Shelley's poem. I'll go to the end of it and I won't quote all 91 verses of it, but it's well worth a read. It's a little bit overquoted, but I think it's really relevant because, again, he's speaking, as far as I can see, to the 99%. Rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. You are many, they are few. Thank you.